Lena had always been the kind of person everyone liked having around. She worked at a small grocery store tucked at the edge of town, the kind of place where the smell of fresh bread greeted you the moment you stepped inside. Every morning she arrived early, before the first customer came through the doors, quietly arranging the fruit display with a soft hum under her breath. She'd been at the store for nearly 7 years. The regulars knew her by name. "Morning, Lena," they'd call as they passed through her aisle. She always smiled back, the kind of warm smile that made you feel seen. Lena was born with a mild physical disability that made walking long distances painful, but she never let that stop her. She took pride in her independence. She didn't like being treated differently, and she worked twice as hard to prove she could handle anything that came her way. The store wasn't fancy, but it was her second home. The flicker of the old fluorescent lights, the creak of the stockroom door, the faint buzz of the cooler, they were all familiar sounds in her day. Her coworkers often said she had a calming presence. If someone was having a bad day, they'd usually find themselves standing near Lena's register, chatting with her until they felt better. For years, things ran smoothly. The small team worked like family. Her manager, a kind older woman named Sarah, often praised her dedication. "You're the heart of this place, Lena," she'd say. And Lena would blush, pretending to be busy with the scanner. But one day, everything started to change. Sarah announced she'd be retiring. There was excitement at first. The company was bringing in a new manager, someone with modern retail experience. The phrase sounded impressive, but no one really knew what it meant. The new manager's name was Mr. Reynolds. He arrived in a crisp suit on his first day, holding a clipboard and wearing a polite but distant smile. The kind of smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. From the beginning, the atmosphere shifted. He spoke in short, clipped sentences. He didn't chat with the staff. He observed them. He carried a small notebook everywhere, scribbling down notes during the busiest hours. Lena tried her best to stay positive. Change was part of life, she told herself. Maybe he'd improve things. Maybe he was just nervous too. But the first week passed and things started to feel colder. The soft background music was replaced with a corporate playlist that looped the same songs over and over. Break times were shortened. The cheerful bulletin board with employee photos was quietly taken down one morning, replaced by a notice. Performance metrics will be reviewed weekly. It was subtle, but everyone felt it. The warmth that had once filled the store was fading. Lena kept doing her job. She still helped the elderly customers find what they needed. She still double-checked expiration dates, organized displays, and went out of her way to make the store look welcoming. But every time Mr. Reynolds walked by, she felt her stomach tighten. He rarely spoke to her, but when he did, it was always about numbers. "You need to increase your scanning speed, Lena," he'd say, without looking up from his tablet. She nodded politely. "Yes, sir. I'll do my best." He'd just hum in response and walk away. It wasn't that she feared him. It was more that he didn't see her. To him, she wasn't Lena. She was just an employee ID number. Still, she held her head high. Her mother had always told her, "Kindness is strength," and Lena believed that. One Friday evening after closing, she stayed behind to help restock the shelves. She wasn't required to. She just wanted to make things easier for the morning shift. She moved slowly, her leg aching more than usual that day, but she didn't complain. As she placed the last box of cereal on the shelf, she looked around the empty store and smiled softly. It was quiet, peaceful, her favorite time of day. Then she heard footsteps. Mr. Reynolds appeared at the end of the aisle, clipboard in hand. "Still here?" he asked flatly. "Yes, sir," she replied, trying to sound cheerful. "Just finishing up the cereal section." He nodded slightly, glancing at his watch. "Be sure you're not clocking overtime. Company policy's clear on that." "Oh, I'm not," she said quickly. "Just wanted to make sure everything's ready for tomorrow." He didn't respond. He just turned and walked away. Lena stood there for a moment, feeling that familiar lump rise in her throat. She brushed it off with a small laugh. "It's fine," she whispered to herself. "Some people just don't understand." She didn't know it yet, but that small, quiet moment, standing alone in that fluorescent-lit aisle, was the calm before everything would change. because in just a few days, she'd be called into that same manager's office, and the news waiting for her there would leave not just her, but everyone in town completely shocked. The following Monday felt like any other day at first. The air inside the store was cool. The hum of the refrigerators filled the quiet, and the smell of coffee drifted in from the break room. Lena clocked in at 8 a.m. sharp, like always, tying her apron neatly and straightening her name tag. But she noticed something different right away. There was a paper taped to the staff bulletin board. Schedule changes, effective immediately. Her eyes scanned the list. Monday 8 to 4, Tuesday off. Wednesday 10 to 2, Thursday off. Friday 8 to 12. She blinked, thinking she must be reading it wrong. That was barely half her usual hours. Maybe it was temporary. Maybe it was a mistake. Before she could ask anyone, she heard her name. Lena, can you come to my office for a minute? It was Mr. Reynolds. Her stomach tightened. She followed him through the narrow hallway behind the registers, where the office sat. Small, sterile, smelling faintly of paper and air freshener. He gestured toward the chair across from his desk but didn't sit down. Instead, he stood flipping through a few sheets of paper clipped to his clipboard. Lena, he began, his tone firm but calm. Corporate's been reviewing labor costs. We've been instructed to reduce hours in several departments. Yours, unfortunately, are being adjusted accordingly. Lena blinked again, trying to process the words. Adjusted? She repeated softly. Yes, he said. You'll be scheduled for 20 hours per week moving forward. She felt her heart drop. 20, but I've always worked full-time. I understand, he replied without looking up. But it's not performance-related. It's just a restructuring measure. Everyone's being affected. Lena's hands fidgeted in her lap. Everyone? She asked. He hesitated for just a second. Some more than others, he said, finally making eye contact. Her mind was spinning. She thought about her rent, her bills, her physical therapy appointments. I rely on those hours, she said quietly. Is there anything I can do? He sighed, closing the folder. Look, Lena, these decisions come from above. I'm just implementing them. I'll try to give you extra shifts when possible, but you'll have to be flexible. Flexible, she repeated, the word heavy on her tongue. He nodded, already turning back to his computer. That'll be all. Lena sat there for a moment, waiting for something more. Maybe reassurance, maybe kindness. But it didn't come. She stood, thanked him softly, and walked out of the office with her head down. Out in the store, everything looked the same. Customers browsing, soft music playing, carts squeaking. Yet everything felt different. Her friend Maya noticed right away. Hey, you okay? She asked. Lena forced a smile. Yeah, just schedule changes, Maya frowned. He cut your hours too? Lena didn't answer. She didn't need to. The look in her eyes said enough. That night, she sat at her small kitchen table, the dim light flickering above her. She opened her notebook and wrote down her new schedule. Then beside it, she added up her rent, utilities, and medication costs. The math didn't work. It wasn't even close. She sighed and closed her eyes, trying to stay calm. She'd been through worse, she told herself. She'd figure something out. But deep down, something felt wrong. The next day, she overheard something that made her heart sink even more. Two co-workers were whispering near the break room. I heard Mr. Reynolds said corporate didn't tell him to cut everyone, one said. He chose who to reduce. Yeah, the other replied. And funny enough, it's mostly older staff or people with limitations. You know, like... She trailed off when she noticed Lena walking by. Lena kept moving, pretending not to hear. But the words echoed in her mind. Older staff? People with limitations. That night, she lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling. Her leg ached from standing all day. She thought about her future, whether this was just the beginning of something worse. But the next morning, she still showed up on time. She still smiled at the customers. She still stacked the shelves neatly, row by row, even when Mr. Reynolds passed by without a word, clipboard in hand. She stayed steady, because that's who she was, someone who didn't give up. And yet, as she looked at her paycheck a week later, seeing how small it was, something inside her shifted. It wasn't just sadness anymore. It was something quieter, heavier, a mix of exhaustion and disbelief. Still, she told herself, it's okay. It's just temporary. But deep down, she knew it wasn't. Something was happening, something unfair, something deliberate. And though she didn't know it yet, this was only the beginning of a much bigger fight. Because sometimes the smallest injustice is what sets off a storm. And Lena's storm was only just beginning. The days that followed felt longer than ever. Each morning, Lena woke up early out of habit, only to realize she didn't need to be at work until hours later. The silence in her small apartment felt heavier now. The hum of the refrigerator, the ticking clock, even the faint sound of cars outside. Everything reminded her that time was passing. But she wasn't moving forward. When she did go to work, the energy in the store had changed. Mr. Reynolds barely spoke to anyone unless it was about numbers or schedules. A few of the older workers had quietly disappeared from the roster. No one really talked about it, but everyone noticed. Lena tried to keep her head down. She smiled for the customers, greeted them with warmth, and hid her worries behind that familiar, gentle voice. But behind the scenes, her world was shrinking. Her paycheck barely covered her rent now. She stopped buying her favorite coffee beans. She started skipping lunches, drinking more water instead to feel full. She even stretched her medication, taking smaller doses to make them last longer. One evening, she sat at her kitchen table, looking at her old therapy appointment card. She sighed. The next session was tomorrow, but she couldn't afford it anymore. She picked up the phone, called the clinic, and canceled with a trembling voice. The nurse on the other end was kind. "We'll keep your spot open, Lena. Just call us when you're ready, okay?" She thanked her softly, hanging up before her voice cracked. At work, she began to notice things, little things. Mr. Reynolds often gave extra shifts to younger employees, even when she offered to help. She overheard him once saying something about needing people who can keep up physically. It stung, not just because of the words, but because of how casually he said them. One afternoon, she stayed late again, helping Maya organize the stockroom. Her leg was throbbing, but she didn't complain. Maya glanced at her and frowned. "You shouldn't push yourself so hard." Lena smiled tiredly. "If I don't do it, who will?" Maya hesitated before asking, "You ever think about saying something? You know, to HR or someone?" Lena shook her head quickly. "I don't want to make trouble. It'll just make things worse," but deep down, a quiet voice whispered, "Worse than this." The next morning, she came in to find her name missing from the weekend schedule. She approached Mr. Reynolds, heart pounding. "Excuse me," she said gently. "I think there might have been a mistake on the schedule. I'm not listed for Saturday or Sunday." He looked up from his computer, expression blank. "No mistake. We're overstaffed this weekend." "But I always work weekends," she said softly. "Not anymore," he replied, turning back to his screen. "We're rotating shifts differently now." Lena stood there for a moment, unsure what to say. "Okay," she whispered finally before walking away. Later, in the break room, Maya found her staring at her lunch. Just an apple and a granola bar. "You didn't even eat breakfast, did you?" Maya asked. Lena smiled faintly. "I'll be fine. Just not hungry," but Maya wasn't convinced. "You shouldn't have to go through this, Lena. You've given this place everything." Lena looked down. "It's not about what we give," she said quietly. "It's about what they choose to see." That night she wrote in her journal, something she hadn't done in months. "I don't understand what I did wrong. I just want to work, to feel useful. Maybe kindness doesn't matter here anymore. Maybe it never did." She closed the book and sat in silence. The following week, she noticed the store had hired 2 new part-time workers, both young, energetic, and without any physical challenges. She trained one of them herself, smiling warmly as she showed him how to scan produce without bruising it. He looked at her, confused. "You're really good at this. How long have you been here?" 7 years, she said softly. He frowned. 7 years? And you're part-time? She forced a smile, something like that. But inside, she felt a sharp sting, not of anger, but of quiet sadness. Still, Lena didn't quit. She couldn't. This job wasn't just her income, it was her anchor. The place she'd built her routine, her purpose, her sense of self, so she kept going. Every day, she showed up on time, stayed late when needed, and treated everyone with respect, even those who overlooked her. But little by little, she began to fade from the spotlight she once held. Customers noticed. One older lady asked, "Where have you been, dear?" I haven't seen you much lately. Lena smiled gently. Just on a new schedule, she said. The woman nodded, unaware of the weight behind those words, and then, one evening as Lena closed the store alone, she saw her reflection in the glass door. Tired eyes, shoulders slumped, apron slightly wrinkled. She barely recognized herself still. She whispered under her breath, "It's just a phase. Things will get better." But a part of her knew this wasn't just a phase. Something unfair was happening quietly, right in front of everyone, and no one was stopping it. Not yet. The next few weeks passed slowly. Lena kept her head down, showing up for every shift she was given. She moved through the aisles quietly, scanning items, straightening shelves, and greeting customers with the same gentle warmth she always had. But inside, something was changing. The exhaustion was no longer just physical. It was emotional. Each time she saw her name missing from another schedule, each time she overheard Mr. Reynolds praising someone new, she felt a quiet sting that wouldn't go away. Still, she smiled. She always smiled, because that's what people expected from her. But one afternoon, something unexpected happened. It was a busy Friday. The store was full, the air buzzing with the sound of carts and chatter. Lena was behind her register, helping a regular customer named Mrs. Porter, a kind older woman who always asked about Lena's day. As they talked, Mr. Reynolds walked by. He frowned slightly when he saw Lena chatting, then stopped beside her register. "Let's keep the line moving," he said curtly, loud enough for everyone to hear. Lena's cheeks flushed. "Of course," she said quietly, speeding up her scanning. Mrs. Porter looked at him, her brow furrowing. "There's no need to be rude, young man," she said sharply. Mr. Reynolds didn't respond. He just gave a tight smile and walked away. When he was gone, Mrs. Porter leaned in and whispered, "He's been treating you unfairly, hasn't he?" Lena hesitated. "It's complicated," Mrs. Porter nodded knowingly. "Well, sweetheart, sometimes silence helps no one." "You deserve better," Lena smiled faintly, but those words stuck in her mind long after Mrs. Porter left. That evening, Maya pulled her aside in the break room. "You know that woman who stood up for you earlier?" she asked. "She posted about it online. It's getting attention." Lena's eyes widened. "What do you mean?" Maya turned her phone around. On the screen was a photo of the store, taken from outside, with a caption that read, "Saw a disabled worker get scolded by her manager for being too friendly with customers. This woman has worked here for years. Shameful behavior." There were already dozens of comments, people sharing stories, asking who it was about, tagging the store's account. Lena's heart raced. "Oh no," she whispered. "I didn't want this," Maya smiled gently. "Maybe it's not a bad thing, Lena. People are starting to notice." That night, Lena couldn't sleep. She kept refreshing the post, watching as it spread. Hundreds of likes, then thousands. Some comments were angry, calling for accountability. Others were simply kind, saying things like, "We stand with her," or "No one should be treated that way." She didn't know what to feel, fear or relief. The next day, she arrived at work early as usual. The atmosphere felt tense. Whispers followed her down the aisles. When she reached her register, she saw Mr. Reynolds standing by the office door, phone in hand, his expression tight. He glanced up at her briefly, then looked away. By lunchtime, everyone knew. The store's corporate office had been tagged in dozens of comments. Local news outlets were starting to pick up the story. Maya found Lena in the stockroom. "You okay?" she asked. "I don't know," Lena admitted. "I didn't want to cause trouble. I just wanted to work." "I know," Maya said softly. "But sometimes the truth causes trouble, and that's not a bad thing." Lena nodded slowly, tears welling in her eyes. For the first time in weeks, she felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Seen. By the end of the week, a local journalist reached out. She wanted to interview Lena, not for scandal, but for awareness. She said the story mattered. Lena hesitated at first. "I don't want to lose my job," she whispered. Maya squeezed her hand. "Maybe you'll help someone else keep theirs." Lena thought about it for a long time. That night, she sat at her desk, looking at her reflection in the dark window. Her apartment was quiet, her notebook open beside her. She flipped to a blank page and began to write. They took my hours. They took my peace. But they won't take my voice. The next day, she agreed to the interview. It wasn't flashy, just a simple online article about workplace discrimination and resilience. The journalist kept her name private at first, referring to her as a local grocery worker. But even without her name, people recognized the story. Customers started coming in and leaving notes for Hershey little folded pieces of paper that said things like, "You're not alone," or "Thank you for standing up." Even the younger workers, who'd stayed quiet before, began to speak up. Told her, "I saw what he did to you. It's not right." And for the first time in a long while, Lena smiled. A real smile, because maybe, just maybe, she wasn't invisible anymore. By the time the article went live, Lena's story had already taken on a life of its own. It began as a small ripple, a few comments of outrage, some kind words from strangers, but within days it became something much larger. People from all over town began sharing the post. Some recognized the store. Others wrote about their own experiences, about unfair bosses and silent struggles that never made the news. What started as one person's pain was becoming everyone's story. Lena didn't expect it. She wasn't trying to be a symbol. She still came to work quietly every morning, still tied her apron neatly, still greeted customers with a soft smile. But now, when she stood behind her register, people looked at her differently, with warmth, with empathy, sometimes even with gratitude. Then one morning, a man in a suit came into the store and introduced himself. "Ms. Lena? I'm from the company's corporate compliance team," he said politely. "We're conducting an internal review," Lena froze. "A review?" He nodded. "We received several public complaints about recent scheduling changes. We'd like to speak with you privately if you're comfortable." Her hands trembled slightly, but she nodded. "Yes, of course." They sat in the small office, the same one where Mr. Reynolds had once told her her hours were being adjusted. Only now Mr. Reynolds wasn't in the room. He was outside, pacing in the hallway, jaw tight. The investigator's tone was calm, patient. He asked questions about her schedule, her work history, her interactions with management. He asked if she felt she'd been treated unfairly. Lena hesitated at first. Her instinct was still to protect, to stay quiet, to not cause waves. But then she remembered Maya's words. Sometimes silence helps no one. So she told the truth, gently, honestly, without anger. She described how her hours had been cut, how she'd seen others, older workers, disabled workers, disappear from the roster, how the store's warmth had vanished the moment new management took over. When she finished, the investigator thanked her. "That was very brave, Ms. Lena," he said sincerely. "We'll look into this immediately." Word spread quickly after that. The staff whispered in corners, nervous but hopeful. Some were called into interviews too. A few even admitted to seeing or hearing things they hadn't spoken up about before. Mr. Reynolds grew more tense each day. He walked faster, snapped at employees, and spent long hours locked in his office. Then, one afternoon, he pulled Lena aside near the back room. His voice was low, sharp. "You think this helps you?" he said. "Bringing outsiders into my store?" Lena blinked, trying to stay calm. "I didn't bring anyone," she said softly. "They reached out to me." He leaned closer. "You made a mistake, Lena. People forget. Things like this never end well." For a second, she felt that old familiar fear rise up, the kind that made her want to shrink away, to apologize for something she hadn't done. But then she looked at him and said, very quietly, "Maybe not for you," and she walked away. That night she told Maya what happened. Maya's eyes widened. "You should report that," she said. "I already did," Lena replied, surprising even herself. A week later, the first official notice went up on the staff bulletin board. Corporate Compliance is conducting an ongoing investigation into workplace conduct. Staff are encouraged to participate freely. The next few days felt like a blur. Investigators came and went. Corporate calls were made. Employees began to open up, some timidly, some fiercely. Stories surfaced of favoritism, unrecorded overtime, and targeted schedule cuts. One of the younger workers, barely out of college, admitted that Mr. Reynolds had told him not to worry about older employees who can't keep up. Another said they'd overheard him say the store needed to be more efficient, which, they now realized, was code for something much worse. As all of this unfolded, the local newspaper ran another article, this time with Lena's permission to use her first name. The headline read, "Local Workers' Story Sparks Corporate Investigation into Discrimination Practices." Her phone buzzed constantly. Messages from strangers, old friends, even customers who thanked her for standing up. One message stood out. It was from a woman in another state. She wrote, "I lost my job after my boss found out about my disability. I never fought back. But because of you, I'm filing a complaint. Thank you." Lena read the message 3 times. Then she cried, not from sadness but from something deeper. Because for the first time in years, she felt powerful. Days passed. The store grew quieter, the tension thicker. Employees spoke in hushed tones, and Mr. Reynolds avoided eye contact with nearly everyone. Then one morning, corporate sent out an announcement. Store manager Mr. Thomas Reynolds is on administrative leave, pending the results of an internal investigation. No one said anything out loud, but the relief was almost visible. A collective breath the whole team had been holding finally released. Lena didn't celebrate. She simply nodded, went back to her register, and continued working. But inside, she felt a calm she hadn't known in months. A few days later, the same investigator returned. He found Lena during her shift and asked if she could step outside for a moment. When they stood near the front doors, he smiled softly. "We've completed the initial review. I can't discuss all the details yet, but I wanted to tell you personally, your courage made a difference." A big one. Lena felt her throat tighten. "Thank you," she whispered. He handed her a small card. "If you ever need support, legal or otherwise, there are people ready to help you." She looked down at the card, then back up at him. "I didn't mean to start anything big," she said quietly. "Change never starts big," he replied. "It starts with someone refusing to be quiet." That evening, when she left work, the sun was setting, golden light spilling across the parking lot. She paused for a moment, looking up at the sky. For months, she had carried the weight of silence. Now it felt just a little lighter. At home, she sat at her desk again, opening her journal. "They tried to make me smaller," she wrote, "but truth doesn't shrink." The next morning, the store doors opened to a new kind of day, one filled not with fear, but with quiet anticipation. Everyone knew something had shifted. The community was watching. The company was listening, and for Lena, the storm she'd weathered was finally turning into light. But the story wasn't finished yet, because what the investigators were about to find next, hidden deep in the company's own files, would leave everyone, even corporate, completely stunned. The investigation took weeks. The store ran differently during that time, quieter, slower, almost uneasy. People came and went with cautious smiles. Everyone could feel the change in the air, but no one dared to speak too soon. Lena kept working her regular shifts, though they felt different now. Coworkers who had once avoided her were suddenly friendly, helpful, even protective. They saw her not as the quiet worker in the corner, but as the woman who had stood up when no one else did. Still, Lena tried to stay humble. She didn't talk about the investigation, didn't brag, didn't complain. She just did her job, scanning, organizing, smiling. It was the only thing that made her feel steady. Then, one cool morning, everything changed. The corporate investigator returned, the same man who had spoken with her before. This time he wasn't alone. 2 other officials followed, carrying folders and sealed envelopes. They asked to use the office, and the doors closed behind them. No one knew what was happening, but the tension spread quickly. Even the customers could sense it. Hours later, the doors opened and Mr. Reynolds stepped out. His face was pale. He didn't look at anyone. He simply removed his name badge, placed it on the counter, and walked out of the store. Just like that, he was gone. The staff stood frozen. Then Maya turned to Lena, eyes wide. Did that just happen?" Lena nodded slowly. "I think so." Later that afternoon, the corporate team gathered everyone for a meeting. The investigator spoke clearly, carefully. After a thorough internal review, he began, "We discovered multiple policy violations under this store's management. This includes targeted scheduling cuts, discriminatory remarks, and deliberate exclusion of certain employees based on personal conditions. These actions were not authorized by corporate leadership and go against our company's values. The room was silent. He continued, effective immediately, the manager has been terminated. Additional audits will be conducted across other locations. New inclusion and ethics training will be mandatory for all management personnel, Maya whispered. He really did it. He targeted you. Lena's hands trembled slightly. She didn't say anything. She couldn't. It was too much to process all at once. The investigator turned to her. Ms. Lena, he said softly, your courage helped us uncover this. You should be proud. She smiled faintly, though her eyes glistened with tears. I just wanted to work in peace, she said quietly. And now, he replied, you can. The following week felt surreal. The story spread beyond town, shared online, featured on small news outlets, discussed in community groups. People called it the grocery store stand-up. Local reporters visited the store again, asking for statements. Corporate released an official apology to Lena and the other affected employees, admitting that leadership oversight had failed them. A few days later, a company representative met with Lena privately. They offered her compensation for the loss of wages and emotional distress, a gesture, they said, of responsibility and respect. Lena didn't ask for much. She only requested her full-time position back, and a promise that this wouldn't happen to anyone else. The representative smiled. You have our word, she said. When Lena returned to her old schedule, it felt like stepping into sunlight after months of rain. Her first full-time paycheck arrived 2 weeks later. She sat at her kitchen table, staring at it for a long time. Not because of the money, but because of what it represented. Stability, dignity, validation. She paid her bills without fear for the first time in months. She even scheduled a physical therapy appointment again. The receptionist on the phone remembered her. It's been a while, Lena. We're glad to have you back, the woman said warmly. Lena smiled. It's good to be back. One afternoon, as she worked in the store, a familiar face appeared. The journalist who'd first shared her story. I just wanted to thank you again, the journalist said. Your story has inspired a lot of people. Did you know they're changing company policies nationwide because of what happened here? Lena blinked in surprise. Really? Yes, the journalist said. They're adding stricter anti-discrimination clauses and better employee support systems. You made a real difference, Lena didn't know what to say. I didn't mean to start anything big, she murmured. The journalist smiled. You didn't start something big. You started something right. They took a photo together for a follow-up story. In it, Lena stood in her aisle, surrounded by neatly stacked shelves and soft light. She wasn't posing, just smiling the way she always did, quietly and sincerely. That night, Lena sat by her window with a cup of tea. The city lights flickered softly in the distance. She thought about everything that had happened, the fear, the struggle, the small moments of kindness that had carried her through. She thought about Maya, who had stood by her when no one else did. About Mrs. Porter, who had spoken up without hesitation. About the strangers online who had sent messages of support. It wasn't just her story anymore. It belonged to everyone who had ever been treated unfairly and stayed silent because they were afraid. She opened her journal and wrote, I used to think standing up for myself meant being loud, but it just means refusing to disappear. She closed the book and smiled to herself. Outside, the wind rustled gently through the trees. Inside, for the first time in a long time, Lena felt peace. A week later, she walked into work to find a small card taped to her locker. The handwriting was familiar. Maya's. For the woman who reminded us all that kindness isn't weakness. It's courage in disguise. Lena pressed the card to her chest, eyes watering. Her life hadn't become perfect overnight. It rarely does. But something inside her had changed forever. She'd gone from being a quiet worker in the background to being the reason the background itself shifted. And though the world kept moving, customers coming and going, shelves being stocked, registers beeping, Lena's story lingered quietly in the air, a reminder that even the softest voices can shake walls. The days following the investigation felt like a new season had arrived. The air inside the store seemed lighter, softer somehow, as if everyone could finally breathe again. The constant tension that once lived between the aisles was gone. In its place was something different. Gratitude, maybe, or respect. Lena noticed it in the small things first. Customers smiled wider. Coworkers lingered at her register just to chat. Even the background music felt warmer, though it hadn't changed. The first weekend after Mr. Reynolds was dismissed, a group of regular customers came in carrying flowers. They placed them on Lena's counter one by one, daisies, lilies, small wildflowers from nearby gardens. "For you," Mrs. Porter said gently. "For standing up, not just for yourself, but for everyone." Lena's eyes welled up. "You didn't have to," Mrs. Porter cut her off with a kind smile. "We wanted to." Word of her story had reached beyond the town. People came from nearby neighborhoods just to meet the woman from the story. They thanked her for speaking out. Some even shared their own stories, moments when they'd been afraid to say something, or when no one had believed them. Lena listened to every one of them. She didn't see herself as a hero. She just saw herself in their words. The same fear. The same quiet longing to be treated with fairness and dignity. A few weeks later, the store hosted a small event, organized not by corporate but by the employees themselves. They called it Kindness Day. The idea was simple. For one day, everything in the store would focus on empathy and appreciation. Handwritten notes were pinned to the shelves with messages like, "Thank you for shopping local," and "You matter." Customers could leave their own notes for employees too. When Lena arrived that morning, she froze at the sight of a large banner hanging near the front door. "Kindness is strength," Maya grinned. "Surprise," she said. "We thought it was about time those words got the attention they deserve." Lena smiled, tears threatening again. "You did all this?" "Not just me," Maya replied. "Everyone." Throughout the day, the store buzzed with laughter and warmth. Children handed out little paper hearts to customers. The local radio station even stopped by to do a short segment about the grocery store that turned struggle into kindness. When they interviewed Lena, she spoke simply, her voice soft but steady. "I think people forget that kindness isn't weakness. It's what keeps us human when the world forgets to be fair." That quote spread online almost as fast as the original story had. Outside of work, Lena's life began to blossom again. She started attending physical therapy regularly. Her therapist noticed the difference immediately. "You're smiling more," he said one afternoon. Lena chuckled. "Maybe I just feel a little lighter these days." She also began volunteering once a week at a local community center, helping others with disabilities prepare resumes, practice interviews, and learn workplace rights. At first, she wasn't sure anyone would show up. But on the first day, a dozen people came. Some used canes or wheelchairs. Others were just nervous, holding papers and hope. When Lena stood before them, she felt her heart swell. She wasn't the quiet cashier anymore. She was someone who understood, someone who had walked through fear and come out stronger. She began with the same gentle tone she'd always had. "I'm not here to tell you what to do," she said. "I'm just here to remind you that your worth doesn't depend on someone else's approval. You belong everywhere you go." The room fell silent for a moment, then filled with soft applause. Afterward, one young woman approached her in tears. "I was scared to tell my boss about my condition," she admitted. "But after hearing your story, I think I'm ready," Lena smiled. "You don't have to be fearless," she said. "Just brave enough to take one small step." Months passed, and the story continued to ripple outward. The company rolled out a new national policy, mandatory inclusivity, and ethics training for all managers. They even invited Lena and a few others to speak at the first session. She stood on a small stage in a conference room filled with corporate leaders. Her hands shook at first, but when she began to speak, her voice found its rhythm, calm, kind, and grounded in truth. "I didn't stand up because I wanted attention," she told them. "I stood up because silence was hurting people like me. All I ever wanted was fairness. That's not a big thing to ask for, but it changes everything when you finally have it." When she finished, the room gave her a standing ovation. She wasn't used to applause, so she simply bowed her head, smiling shyly. Later, the head of HR approached her and said, "You've changed more than one store. Lena, you've changed the culture." She laughed softly. "All I did was tell the truth," he smiled. "Sometimes that's all it takes." Back at the store, things were different now. A new manager took over, a kind woman named Sophia, who believed in teamwork and open communication. She asked Lena to be part of an employee council to help guide fair scheduling and accessibility improvements. Lena accepted, not out of pride, but out of purpose. She wanted to make sure no one else had to go through what she did. And under Sophia's leadership, the store flourished. Sales improved, morale lifted, and even corporate noticed the positive shift. Customers said they could feel the difference the moment they walked in. One afternoon, Maya turned to Lena and said with a grin, "You know what's funny? We used to be scared to speak up. Now we can't stop talking." Lena laughed. That's the best kind of problem to have. Outside of work, Lena's life grew richer in quiet ways. She spent weekends tending a small garden on her apartment balcony. Herbs, daisies, and a single rose bush that bloomed brighter each month. She said it reminded her of herself, slow to grow, but steady once the light found her. She reconnected with old friends she'd lost touch with. She even started painting again, something she hadn't done since her teens. Each canvas she finished told part of her story. Calm skies, golden light, people standing tall against shadows. Her apartment began to fill with them, small testaments to resilience. Then, one morning, she received a letter in the mail. It was handwritten, addressed simply to Lena, the kindness lady. Inside, a young man had written, "My mom told me your story. She said you reminded her that good people still exist. I wanted to thank you for being brave when it was hard. Because of you, I spoke up at my job too." They listened. Lena read the note twice, then smiled through tears. She placed it inside her journal beside her old entry, the one that read, "They took my hours. They took my peace. But they won't take my voice." She looked at the two pieces of paper together, the past and the present, and felt something full and whole inside her. That evening, the sun set slowly, painting the sky in hues of gold and violet. Lena sat by her window, tea in hand, the radio humming softly in the background. She thought about the girl she'd been a year ago, tired, scared, unsure of her place. And she thought about the woman she'd become, strong, seen, and peaceful. Her voice had changed more than her life. It had changed others too. Sometimes she still got messages online. People shared their own stories of injustice, of courage, of finding light in small moments. She read everyone, offering a kind reply when she could, because she knew what it felt like to need someone to simply say, "I see you." The next day, as she opened the store, the sunlight streamed through the windows, lighting up the aisles in gold. Maya was already there, unpacking boxes. She looked up and smiled. "Morning, hero," Lena laughed. "Don't start that again." But Maya only grinned wider. "Hey, you earned it." Lena shook her head, still smiling. "I didn't do it alone." Maya paused, then nodded. "No one ever does." They worked in silence for a while, the peaceful rhythm of normal life filling the air, the kind of quiet that doesn't feel empty, but full. When the doors opened and the first customers came in, Lena felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Not fear, not anger, but peace. The kind that comes when you know you've done the right thing. Even when it was hard, as she greeted the first customer of the day, her voice carried warmth and calm. The same as always, but now beneath that softness, there was strength, real strength. And though the world outside kept moving, the noise, the headlines, the daily rush, Lena's story lingered in the hearts of everyone who'd heard it. A story that began with loss, but ended with courage. A story that reminded people everywhere that even the smallest act of bravery can change everything.